Hello, welcome to 10 at 10. My name is Michael Ramage. I'm the director of the Cyber Education Research Center here at Murray State University, and welcome back to 10 at 10. 10 at 10 is brought to you through a partnership between Murray State University, Grow West, the Technology Council of West Kentucky, KY Innovation, and local partner Sprocket Innovation in Paducah and the Kentucky Innovation Station in Madisonville. We are back with episode 167. It is spring break at Murray State, so we are coming from the home office instead of the work office. But I wanted to continue as we began our new year. Every other week we're doing news, but every other week we want to talk about some technology topic. And we've been talking about the five basic cybersecurity tips that I always give to folks as they think about how to get started with their organization. I think it's really important to kind of walk through these. And I wanted to start the new year out with the same way we've started each year with these five tips. And so this week we are actually on the last tip, and it's about implementing security technologies. And and what I mean, well, I'll get into what I mean about it for in a second, but let me start with it is intentional to me that security technologies is last because first of all, we have to start with a policy. If we don't have a policy, and you're going to see that in a minute as well, then we don't necessarily know what technology we need and where we need to invest it. Passwords is probably the low hanging fruit that we should all address personally and professionally. Beyond that, 90% of attacks have some human element in it. So user education is important. And then finally, all of our organizations have some level of technology in it. None of us are starting from truly from zero. So it's important to do an audit or an assessment against whatever our policy says we should be doing, what best practices say we should be doing. It's important to audit that, audit your network against something. We do all of that, in my mind, before we really start spending a lot of money on security technologies. There is a ton, millions of dollars that you could spend on security technologies for your organization. It doesn't make sense to necessarily spend that much. It's going to be very dependent on your organization, but having a plan and how to approach it is going to be a good first step. Because then we get to this, and I've used this design for a long time. It's like this is a massive, ridiculous, confusing network. Where do you start with your technologies? Where do you start with that investment? How do you think about, well, do I put it here? Do I put it there? Do I put it on the server? Do I put it on the router? Do I put it on the network connections? Do I put it on the user? Where on the physical building, on the virtual network? Where is it? Where do I put the investment? And that the other reason that I always like to start with technology last is because it can be overwhelming. And so many times I'll have folks that go to a conference, hear about a cool technology, and they think, all right, well, we need to come back and implement this tomorrow. Well, maybe you do, but maybe it doesn't apply to your risk situation, to your scenario, or it's not consistent with your policy that you have now. So we want to make sure that we're methodical instead of just spending money where it can get complicated pretty quick. So, where do we start? I like to explain that the whole point of cybersecurity is about the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of our information, of our data, of our organization's data. So primarily, we're talking about how do we protect our data. There are three different places where data is being utilized. It is being utilized at rest, in transit, and in use. In rest, meaning it's being stored on a server somewhere, we're not touching it, or it's on a backup tape, we're not touching it. It's not changing states at that moment. It's just at rest. In transit means it's being transported. Now, typically that means it's being sent across the network from one server to another server or from a server to a user. A lot of times that's on the same local network. Now, with remote working, with the internet evolving the way that it has, Now it might be sending it from one network to another. We've got to protect the data there. And then finally, in use, whether that's on a local computer, it's on a server, it's on a website, when that data is actually being utilized, how are we protecting it? And it can get hard. It can be a challenge to do that in all of these places. But that's where we need to focus our energies is how do we protect the data in all of these areas? Now, let me share another way to think about this. And to me, this is the most simplistic way to think about it. If you look across the top, there's identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. If you've been following 10 at 10, we've talked about the new NIST cybersecurity framework, now version 2.0. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover are the 5 components of version 1. If you look down in the bottom in the green, we've added govern there, which is the component that was added for version 2. What the bottom part says is that the further you are on the left side, on the identify, protect, the more heavily you're relying on technology. As you get right side, or as folks will call it, left of boom, meaning the incident happens, and right of boom, the more that you get to the responding to an incident, the responding recover, the more people intensive those processes are. And then underlying all of this is the process and the governance, meaning that policy, that strategy should underpin everything that we're doing. All right. So that's kind of the way to think about it is to the far left, we're going to use a lot of technology to identify and protect, and we're going to use a lot of people to respond and recover. But that doesn't mean that there's no people involved in the identify and protect and that there's no technology involved in the respond and recover. It's a spectrum that we should think about. All right. So that's the first thing to understand. And then the second piece is there should be a process, a technology, a people, something in every single one of these boxes that you see on the screen. So if you think about devices on Identify, what tool, process can we have or should we have in there to identify devices or identify threats on our devices? What about on our applications? What about identifying threats on our networks? Identifying threats to our data, identifying threats to our users. All of those should have something that is identified, whether it's people or technology or processes. It should be something that governance even that we should have in there. Then you work your way across. So let's just use networks, for example. We should have something to identify threats on our network, protect our networks from threats, detect threats, respond to threats, and recover from threats to our network from incidents. All of those things should have something in that box. So now, some boxes may have multiple things, some boxes may only have one. That's okay. But here's the way to use this, and this is a great way to talk through folks. And friend and supporter Wes Spencer is really big on the cyber defense matrix and utilizing this to do a lot of different things. But because it's a great way to have a conversation. But if you're thinking about technologies and you're trying to implement things and you put all of your technologies, all of your processes, all of your people and approaches to things in a box, and you look at this and you have 3 or 4 boxes missing with nothing in it, then you've probably not done what you need to do, and you should consider going back and reassessing the things that you need to be doing. It's a great way to think about it. It makes things that are really, really complicated to think through and talk about to come back. Now, this is not my original thought. If you Google the cyber defense matrix, you can find a book on this. But it's a great way to think through it. and really start that thoughtful process about how do you implement technologies. And finally, I go back, isn't that table much easier to understand and to think through than this overwhelming graphic of what your network may really look like? That is why that I do it, or that's the why that folks talk about the cyber defense matrix. That's why I would recommend that's where you start. Thank you very much for joining this week. I'll see you next week back here on 10 at 10. Thank you. Bye.